On the night before the most important invasion in modern history, a woman sat down and wrote a sentence about a dentist appointment. That's it. That's the whole secret weapon. No code-breaking machine. No hidden microphone. No gun. Just a woman, a pen, and a lie about needing money for the dentist. And because of that one sentence, an entire division of German tanks, some of the most powerful armored vehicles in Hitler's army, drove in completely the wrong direction. Away from Normandy. Away from the beaches where, 10 days later, thousands of Allied soldiers would land and the tide of the Second World War would finally turn. By the time the Germans realized they'd been played, it was too late to undo it. This woman was never a soldier. She'd never fired a weapon in her life. A few years earlier, she'd been better known for losing money at casino tables than for anything resembling heroism. British intelligence didn't recruit her because she was tough. They recruited her because she was broke, bored, and charming enough to talk her way into any room in occupied Europe. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly how a sentence about a dentist managed to do what entire armies couldn't, and why almost nobody knew her name until decades after she died. Her name was Elvira Chaudoir. British intelligence called her Agent Bronx. This is one of the strangest true stories of World War II, a gambler, a socialite, a woman who slept with whoever she wanted and answered to nobody, who ended up holding more influence over the outcome of D-Day than most generals on either side. Let's go back to the beginning. Elvira Josefina Chaudoir was born in 1911 in Lima, Peru, but Peru barely got to keep her. Her father was a diplomat, and diplomats move. By the time she was old enough to remember anything clearly, the family had relocated to Paris, where he took up a post at the Peruvian embassy. Growing up in diplomatic circles meant growing up around power, even if you weren't the one holding it. Dinner parties with ambassadors. Conversations drifting between 3 languages at the table. The finest private schools Paris had to offer. By her teenage years, Elvira was fluent in Spanish, French, and English, not because she studied hard, but because that was simply the air she breathed. It's worth pausing here, because this detail matters more than it seems. Everything that made her useful to British intelligence a decade later, the languages, the comfort around powerful men, the instinct for moving through elite rooms without drawing suspicion, none of it was trained into her for the purpose of spying. It was just how she'd been raised. She wasn't built to be a spy. She was simply already exactly what a spy would need to be, years before anyone thought to ask her to become one. At 23, she did what a lot of young women of her class did when they wanted a change of scenery: she got married. Her husband, Jean Chaudoir, was a Belgian banker, stable, respectable, almost certainly a disappointment to a woman who had grown up surrounded by ambassadors and intrigue. Brussels, by her own account, bored her senseless. So in 1938, she left. Not her marriage exactly, just Brussels, just the dullness, for the sun, the casinos, and the late-night parties of Cannes, on the French Riviera. The party didn't last. In 1940, German forces swept through France, and Paris, the city she'd grown up in, fell within weeks. Most people in her position would have felt the walls close in. Elvira, in a strange way, had an advantage almost nobody else did: a diplomatic passport. While ordinary citizens were rationed, restricted, and watched, she could move. She followed her father's posting south to Vichy, the supposedly unoccupied half of France, though unoccupied is generous, given that the government there was led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, a man who'd essentially handed France to the Nazis in exchange for being allowed to keep a desk and a title. With her papers and her connections, Elvira found she could still cross into Britain when she wanted to. And what did a wealthy, bored, recently displaced socialite do with that kind of freedom in the middle of a world war? She went straight back to what she knew: the bars and card tables of London. The house, as it always does eventually, won. By 1942 she was in serious debt, working a forgettable job as a translator for the BBC, a million miles, at least in spirit, from the diplomatic dinners of her childhood. Here's where fate, or more accurately, a bored complaint at the right bar, changes the entire shape of her life. April 1942. A London club. Elvira, doing what she apparently did often, was venting to an RAF officer about her money troubles and her dreadfully dull job. Most people who hear a stranger complain about their finances forget it by the next morning. This officer didn't. Impressed by her poise, her fluency in 3 languages, and her apparently effortless ability to navigate elite circles, he passed her name along to a man named Claude Danzy, the assistant chief of MI6, Britain's secret intelligence service. Think about what MI6 was actually looking for in 1942. Not soldiers. Not codebreakers, necessarily. They needed people who could walk into a room full of powerful men and be invited back. People the enemy would want to recruit, because if German intelligence thought they'd found a useful asset, British intelligence could be the ones actually pulling the strings the whole time. A broke, bored, beautifully connected socialite with a diplomatic passport and family ties inside Vichy France wasn't a curiosity to men like Danzy. She was close to perfect. MI6's plan for her was almost laughably simple, at least on paper: send her back into French high society, let her socialize exactly the way she always had, and see who came looking for her. This wasn't espionage in the way movies usually show it. There was no grand training montage, no infiltration of a heavily guarded compound. The plan was to let Elvira be exactly who she already was: charming, visible, a little reckless, and wait. There were people inside British intelligence who had concerns. Internal notes from the time worried about her colorful personal life potentially making her vulnerable to compromise. But the value she offered outweighed the hesitation, and the plan moved forward anyway. She returned to Vichy France, slipping back into the same elite social and military circles she'd always moved through, except this time, every conversation was being filed away for a purpose. She didn't have to wait long for an opportunity to present itself. September 1942, back in Cannes. An old acquaintance, a man who had become a Nazi collaborator after time as a prisoner of war, recognized an opportunity in Elvira's charm and connections, and introduced her to a German intelligence officer who went by the nickname Bibi. Over 3 long evenings at a discreet black market restaurant, the kind of place that quietly served the wealthy and the occupiers while ordinary French citizens went without, Bibi courted her. Long dinners. Late-night walks along the waterfront. By the end of it, he was, by every account, genuinely infatuated. And infatuation, it turns out, makes for sloppy intelligence work. Bibi made her an offer: work for German military intelligence, the WWII, gathering economic information out of Britain, in exchange for a retainer of £100 a month. She said yes. What followed is almost unbelievable in its irony. The WWII personally trained her in their newest tradecraft, secret ink, invisible to the naked eye. She learned to treat a sheet of paper just right, neither too thick nor too thin, rubbing it down with dry cotton wool. Using nothing but the broken tip of a matchstick, she learned to write in letters so faint they barely touched the page. The Germans were training their own infiltrator how to spy on them, without the faintest idea that's exactly what they were doing. When she returned to England in October 1942, British intelligence formally brought her under their control and gave her a new code name, Agent Bronx, named, fittingly, after her favorite cocktail. She now had 2 handlers, on 2 sides of the war, and only one of them knew the truth. British intelligence didn't trust her blindly, even after recruiting her. There was no way to independently confirm her account of Bibi or whether his backing from the WWII was even real. She'd been recruited while financially desperate, and desperate people sometimes tell handlers what they think handlers want to hear. So while analysts examined the secret ink samples she'd brought back, MI5 quietly watched her. They tapped her phone. They wanted to know if, in private, away from the performance, she ever expressed sympathy for the Germans. What they found instead was simply, her. She kept a live-in boyfriend at her Mayfair flat. She hosted parties most nights and played poker until early morning. She was also, notably, involved in a relationship with a woman, a racehorse owner named Monica Sheriff, connected to the Windsor family. Her personal life was unconventional even by wartime London standards. None of it amounted to disloyalty. Slowly, British intelligence came to trust that her intentions were genuine, and more importantly, her controlled communications back to the Abwehr showed that the Germans had come to trust her completely. She'd passed the test on both sides, without either side fully realizing what kind of test it was. Once trusted, Agent Bronx became part of something much larger than herself, a system the British called the double-cross system, a coordinated effort using captured and turned German agents to feed a steady, carefully managed diet of half-truths and outright fabrications back to Berlin. Her primary tool was the secret ink letter, sent to her bank in neutral Lisbon, a known route for wartime intelligence on both sides. Every letter was a careful blend, drafted under British direction, just enough real, low-stakes information to keep her credible, wrapped around the lies that actually mattered. In one such letter, historians believe she helped talk the Germans out of a poison gas attack on London, by convincing them Britain already had retaliatory chemical weapons stockpiled and ready. But letters were slow, agonizingly slow for wartime decisions that needed answers in days, not weeks. So a faster system was devised, hidden inside something as mundane as a bank telegram. The code was elegant in its simplicity. The amount of money she requested would indicate a specific invasion target. The reason she gave for needing it, a doctor, a dentist, medicine, would indicate her confidence in the information. And how urgently she said she needed the money would tell the Germans whether an invasion was weeks away or imminent within days. An entire early warning system for an Allied invasion, disguised as a slightly demanding telegram to a bank. Before the real performance, there was a dress rehearsal, and like most rehearsals, it didn't go perfectly. In 1943, as Allied forces pushed through Sicily and Soviet troops fought brutally on the Eastern Front, the Allies launched Operation Cockade, a sprawling deception meant to convince German commanders that an invasion of northern France was imminent that year, pinning German divisions in the west and drawing the Luftwaffe into a costly air battle. Agent Bronx played her part, reporting a fabricated invasion date timed to align with messages from other double agents, a coordinated chorus of lies all pointing the same direction. It didn't fully work. The Germans declined to take the bait, and instead of reinforcing the west, they pulled 10 divisions out of northern France entirely. On paper, a failure. But failures teach lessons that successes never can. Cockade showed Allied planners exactly how convincing, and how unconvincing, their deception techniques actually were under real conditions. Every flaw exposed in 1943 would be quietly corrected before the stakes became unrecoverable in 1944. By May 1944, everything, the recruitment, the secret ink, the failed rehearsal, had been building toward this single moment. The real invasion, the one we now simply call D-Day, was weeks away. And the Allies needed one thing above all else: German eyes pointed anywhere except Normandy. The plan Elvira was assigned to support was called Plan Ironside, a quieter, more focused companion to the much larger and more famous Operation Fortitude. Where Fortitude used inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and entire phantom armies to sell the lie of an invasion at Pas-de-Calais, Ironside relied on something simpler and arguably more dangerous: 3 trusted double agents, telling a believable story with nothing but their own credibility. Elvira was one of them. Her target, the Bay of Biscay, near Bordeaux, hundreds of miles south of the real landing beaches. German commanders were already nervous about the region. Allied intelligence had picked up on that anxiety and decided to feed it. On the 23rd of May 1944, Elvira sent her telegram to her bank in Lisbon. In French, it read simply, "Send £50, quickly, I need it for the dentist." To anyone glancing at it, it was nothing. A woman asking her bank for money. To the men decoding it on the other end, it meant something very specific: an Allied landing at the Bay of Biscay, confirmed, within the week. They believed her completely. German commanders, convinced the threat was real, moved the 11th Panzer Division, one of the most powerful armored formations in the entire German army, out of position to defend a stretch of coastline the Allies had never intended to touch. 10 days later, the actual invasion began at Normandy. And the 11th Panzer Division, tanks that could have devastated the first vulnerable hours of the Allied landing, was hundreds of miles away, guarding a beach that nothing was ever going to attack. One sentence about a dentist appointment. £50 that were never even spent. N.A. She knew the question was coming. When the attack at the Bay of Biscay never happened, her German handlers would want an explanation, and a poor one could end her usefulness, or worse, end her. So before D-Day even arrived, she'd already planted the cover story. A follow-up letter, deliberately timed to arrive late, blamed a drunken British diplomat who had supposedly given her bad information about the timing. By the time the letter landed on a desk in Berlin, the real invasion had already begun, and nobody had the time or the resources left to chase down a discrepancy in an old telegram. Even after D-Day, her work didn't stop entirely, it just mattered less. Her continued reports, alongside those of fellow double agents, helped convince German high command, including Hitler himself, to keep significant reserves held back near Pas-de-Calais, still bracing for a second invasion that was never actually coming. By early 1945, on a final trip to Madrid, she went looking for any remaining Abwehr contacts and found none. The Nazi war machine was collapsing, and nobody had the time or resources left to run spies anymore. The double life that had defined 4 years of her existence simply ran out of road. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Elvira didn't write a memoir. She didn't give interviews. She retired to the south of France and opened a small gift shop, trading invisible ink and coded telegrams for an ordinary, unremarkable life, selling souvenirs to tourists. Recognition, when it finally came far too late to mean very much. In December 1995, 50 years after the war ended, British intelligence sent her a check for £5,000, a belated acknowledgement of her service. She died 5 weeks later, on the 11th of January 1996, at the age of 85. Her full intelligence file wasn't even declassified until 2005, nearly a decade after her death. For most of her life, and for years after it ended, almost nobody alive knew that a woman who once ran a gift shop on the Riviera had, with a single sentence about a dentist appointment, helped clear a path for the most important military invasion of the 20th century. She isn't remembered the way generals are. There's no statue, no street named after her. But on the morning of June 6, 1944, while thousands of soldiers fought their way onto the beaches of Normandy, an entire division of German tanks was sitting hundreds of miles away, guarding a coastline nothing was ever going to touch, because of her. Agent Bronx stands today alongside other lesser-known D-Day spies, agents with names like Garbo, Tate, Brutus, and Tricycle, as proof that in the hidden world of wartime intelligence, a well-timed lie could be more powerful than a battalion of tanks. If you want more of these forgotten stories, the women history almost erased, subscribe, and tell me in the comments whose story we should uncover next.